I looked around me. That I was again, I knew people, I knew their lives, I knew what they were doing, and I didn't envy anyone. Like envy, not in a bad way. Like I didn't want to be in
Yeah,
anyone's shoes. Not even the executives who were making millions of dollars with like
sure.
huge house and whatever. Because again, I felt like these people are just always stressed out, always busy, pretty much Monday to Sunday.
Daniel's the founder of Small Bets. It's an organization that he started focused on a philosophy about communities and the idea that, you really can't predict what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so you should design your life to make small bets, validate them, and then expand them and grow from there. He's had some great success with that business. Prior to that, he had a stint at Amazon and had the golden handcuffs there. We're going to dig into that. And then now he sold his business in small bets, several $1 million, arguably financially comfortable, and now is looking to continue to figure out what he wants to do next. And so, Daniel, without further ado, like I'd love to kind of understand as you went through your journey of a employee at Amazon, getting that itch to do your own thing, doing your own thing, exiting. As we break all of this down, what sort of drove you to join Amazon in the first place? Like, what was that journey like?
Yeah.
And then from there, we'd like to understand how you moved on to the other phases that you've experienced.
Yeah, so look, I had, I think, a very typical software engineer career path up to a certain point. I grew up fascinated by computers from when I was a kid. Wanted to, my dream was to sort of have a job as making software, and sort of I followed the typical path. I studied computer science. I grew up in a small country, Malta, just south of Italy in the Mediterranean. Very few opportunities there for tech, but after college, I managed to find work at a couple of very small companies doing some software programming. In sort of 2008, 2009, just after the sort of financial crisis, after companies started hiring again, I got interested to basically get to see how the sausage is made at the bigger places. Amazon was on my shortlist already because I had already started dabbling with Amazon Web Services and their cloud compute software. Long story short, uh, 2010, early 2010, I took a one-way flight from Malta to Dublin, Ireland. Dublin at the time, maybe still is, was a bit of the Silicon Valley of Europe. Lots of big tech companies have had, at least. I think they still have the headquarters there. So it was a bet at the time. Again, like I think I had just 3 months worth of rent saved. And it was me and my wife. We both said, look, we're going to try to find something there. If it doesn't work out, we'll come back home, live with our parents a bit until we get to our feet and figure it out. But it worked. I found a job at Amazon, very entry level junior software engineer position. Incidentally, my wife found a job at Microsoft, which complete coincidence happened to be both Seattle area companies. And the motivation, like I said, I just wanted to learn at the time. I was using software, I was using the tools that these big tech companies were building, but I just didn't know how to build things. I was using databases, but I had no idea how do you build a database, for example. And this was primarily my motivation at first. And if we stretch a bit further, so basically a couple of years later, I got invited to move to Seattle, and sort of we said yes and moved to Seattle, and that's where we are here right now. My wife also happened to move to Microsoft in Seattle, so that's a bit of part of the story. But motivation-wise, I think very quickly I started to see diminishing returns from this desire of just learning and absorbing. Of course, I was still learning, but after the first couple of years, right, you absorb 80% of what you could absorb, and every additional year starts to become less and less. And I think
Daniel,
what
I
was
want to.
happening over, yes, yeah,
Sorry to dig in. I want to
stop me.
understand the move from like going from Malta to Dublin. I mean, that
Yeah.
seems scary from the outside, right? Like, yes, there's a desire, a hunger to learn, no question. But then to have the conviction, like what was going through your mind? What was the thought process there of like saying, okay, this is where I want to go learn? And any fears that you
To
had
be
to
honest,
overcome?
I think it was scarier Dublin to the USA rather than the other way around. Dublin still felt very close to home. Right, we had sort of 3 hour flight going back to Malta. We were basically going every couple of months visiting family. It wasn't all in the European Union. Same currency, it felt the same thing. So it didn't really feel that different. And again, there was that fallback that if things don't work out, you can easily go back. It wasn't very disruptive. I think it was more the one to the US that was harder because we were going to be way further distance wise from family. I had never been to the US before. We had committed to move with all the immigration purpose and everything. It's difficult to do so. But look, I think at the end of the day, the way I reasoned about it and the way I would recommend people to reason about these things is, you think about the worst case scenario, like this negative visualization, like the ancient Stoics used to preach. That was the worst thing that could happen. And, the worst case scenarios weren't scary. Sure. I mean, maybe I lose the job. I go back to where I was before. It's not that big of a problem. So yeah, I think I mentioned. I think what happened, I'm not certainly not a nomad type of person, even though I changed countries 3 times. Basically, I lived 3 different places in a relatively short period of time. But I like to settle down, and if I'm moving somewhere, I move with the intention of this is it, I'm settling. And I think the move to Dublin to the US was even more a bit, concerning, or whatever is the best way to describe it, was because I had just moved, and within 2 years at one moment, I was thinking of, I'm going to buy a house. We just bought a car. We're settling down. And my manager at the time told me, hey, what if you want to? My manager wanted to move to the US, back to the US. He was from the US originally. And he asked me to move with him. And it made me hesitant for a while. In fact, actually, I said no initially. Then sort of my wife changed my mind. And I'm very grateful because I'm very happy now where I am. So,
So talk through that process. That's super
yeah,
interesting. Like
yeah,
talk through that a little bit if you don't mind. Help us understand because there's clearly an upside, right? Like there was a desire of what you wanted to make this move, and you're thinking through the worst case scenario. So walk us through that thought
yeah.
process.
No, I think the upside was this was still in a time where the upside was just more exposure. Basically, Dublin was a satellite office. There were like 200 people employed in the office I worked. The Seattle headquarters had tens of thousands of people, like all the experts, all the principal engineers, all the executives. Jeff Bezos was there. It was the headquarters, and I think that was the desire, like just to be there. I didn't know tangibly what to expect. I didn't know it was going to, be significantly better. Just and remember, like I was 27 at the time, so relatively young. I'm 42 now, so it feels a long time ago. Yeah, the upside was I just want exposure, learn, absorb, meet people, and so on and so forth. There was part financial as well. I have to admit at the time. Right? I mean, but financial. When I accepted the offer at Amazon in Ireland, it wasn't even the best offer I had. Like at the time, I interviewed a bunch of other companies. I'm totally transparent. Amazon offered me 55,000 euros per year with a little bit of a small bonus, nothing spectacular compared to the sort of paychecks that software engineers are getting today. But I said yes again, just because Amazon was at the top of my list at the time. It was purely I wanted to be there. But the move to Seattle was pretty much doubled my salary, right? Just same position, same work, same team. Went from, 55K euros to about $120,000 overnight. So that was already, I remember moving to Ireland thinking my goal, financially, at least my goal was to get to 6 figures within 10 years. So it's a sort of vague goal in my head. And I thought that was going to be a stretch at the time. This sort of the seeing the offer from Amazon that were already in the 6 figures after a couple of years was a big thing for me. Little I knew that there was a very, very high ceiling. Eventually, I end up making. We'll talk about the golden handcuffs, I'm sure. But at the time, I was still very naive and very, the sort of salary of ceilings and bands were still quite opaque to me. Right? So that was also, I would say, part of it, but it certainly wasn't the major thing.
So it seems like when you were in Dublin and then into your journey to Seattle, you were pretty happy with or you were still young, you were learning, you were making progress in the organization, I imagine. Let's go a little bit further down the road. Like, at what point did you start? I don't know if
Yes,
disillusioned is the right word, but like, what
yes,
point did you start thinking
yes,
maybe this is not something I want to continue with?
yes. Uh, So it happened probably at my fourth year. This was about 2015, right? So I joined 2010 Amazon at the start of 2015. There was some changes in the company. We changed the manager. I like the manager again. Like I never had any problems with people, but sort of the work changed. I was basically waking up in the morning, going to work, not particularly motivated. Again, mostly it was diminishing returns of like what I was absorbing, what I was getting. I got promoted a couple of times, which again helped a lot financially. That I was now making 250K per year, so very very happy on that side. We just had our first kids, right? So we're starting a family. My wife stopped working, but still everything is good home and so on and so forth. But professionally, especially as my role, sort of my level grew, it became more bureaucratic, right? I was doing less the hands-on tinkering with computers, and now I'm sort of dealing with people and with executives, and writing documentation that nobody reads, and doing the kind of things that I felt was purposeless. Even though, again, like if I take the perspective of the company and of the managers and the directors, it wasn't purposeless, but for me, it's stuff that I wouldn't do. And I think I have something. I think we're all different, right? But probably I have low tolerance than average for doing purposeless things just because
Yeah,
they need to be done. I think there's a bit of a rebellious gene
you
that
become
was
you
starting to
become a
get
cog
exposed.
in the machine, right?
Yeah, that cog in machine feeling. And again, like there's the little things started to bother me, like, the typical full-time employee corporate world experience. You have to take time off, you have to ask for permission, that you need to do something, to get approval and so on and so forth. Again, nothing radical. These were all nothing really. I don't really have any stories of bad experiences or whatever, just these little things. And at the time, I happened to read a blog post. This again, like I was actually on vacation. I was visiting family. This was still 2015. I did a blog post about. It was called Reconsider. It was a blog post about reconsidering venture capitalistic backed businesses. Typically in tech, right? I mean, most people like I was who wanted to venture on themselves on their own. The typical part was you go find an investor or a group of investors, you have some big idea, you go all in, and so on and so forth. There was this blog post called Reconsider by DHH, the creator of Ruby on Rails, one of the most popular programming frameworks, which really struck a nerve. And this post was about reconsider this part, right? I mean, why would you want to quit your corporate job to end up in something worse, where you end up beholden to investors, where you can't just quit by giving your 2 weeks notice, but you're now committed, at least ethically and morally, right, to people that gave you $1 million to work on this idea, right? And now you're caught into the system. And it stuck a nerve because at the time, I think the environment was pulling me towards that part of thinking of some big grandiose idea and finding investors and sort of going that path. And suddenly it sort of put me onto another third track. I was feeling, maybe if my career as a full-time employee is not the right path for me, but this other one is probably even worse. What about the third part? And this was still very ambiguous and nebulous. What does it mean to become self-employed where I don't have that structure, right? Or other people, other stakeholders, and so on and so forth. And it took me another 3 years until I took the plunge to quit. And happy to talk more about that. But maybe if you have questions, I'll pause here for a minute. But this basically was the point, like 2015, about 4.5 years in. And I think from that point onwards, I knew that this is a chapter that I'm closing, right? It's sort of like I started to realize, do I need to save a bit more money? Is it now the right time to quit? I was just waiting for the right moment.
Yeah.
And to be honest, probably I waited too long. You know how we say, sort of waiting for the green lights to be all green, and they never are all green in line. But at least at some point I did take the plan.
I feel like there's always this pattern of curious people, that you're always asking why, you're always you're introspective and trying to understand what really is giving you purpose and meaning. And as you're learning and growing and being curious, that's somewhat easy to satisfy. But then what you see and what you're exposed to continues to grow, and different
Yes.
ideas attract you. And you mentioned the blog post by the creator of Ruby on Rails that attracted you. It took you into another
Yes.
perspective that you could see yourself operating under as an entrepreneur. So walk us through that, because you seem like obviously you have a good level of risk tolerance, being able to leave your country twice and then leave the other country and come to the States. And then also this sort of like pull of what financials put on you of saying, okay, I have a
Yes.
wife, I have a child, right? Like I have a financial
Yes.
expectation of what I want to provide. So help us understand how you in your own mind reconciled all of those different dimensions of your decision making.
Yes. No, so this was the hardest part for sure. And again, because it almost felt selfish to, I think if I was single, no dependents, no family, I would have quit sooner. And I've done this in the past, even early in my journey. I wake up, I feel like, this is not the right path for me, and I make a decision quickly. But again, like financially, I'm very open with finances. I talk about these publicly often. But at this time, like sort of 2016, 2017, I think 2016, I made over 400K from Amazon, right? Sort of total compensation, cash in my bank. That is not some paper money or whatever, literally gross income. 2017 was over 500K, right? And 2018 was even the 515 or something like that. So serious money that I felt this wasn't just mine, right? I mean, at this time I had two kids now, and my wife was working at home, helping with the family, and giving that up felt like, you know, the sort of resources of the family that it wasn't going to be easy. Like I said before, I like to reason about risk, like what's the worst case scenario and so on and so forth. And I was very cognizant that this wasn't an easy job to get back into exactly at the same conditions. I thought I could find another job, of course, but to find exactly the same conditions, the same compensation was going to be hard. But I think the way I reasoned about it is that, I really believed, I don't know if I managed to convince my wife, to be honest, at the time, but at the time I certainly believed myself that this was the best trade-off for our lifestyle as a family. Like the fact that I wasn't going to be committed to the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, just 3 weeks of paid vacation and having to ask for permission, and even the fact that I wasn't there a lot. Again, my kids were very young at the time, and I was leaving home at 7 in the morning and arriving at late 6, 7 p.m. I arrived tired because you're at the office all the time, meeting after meeting, and so on and so forth. Basically, the days were flying by. So I really believed that this was the best lifestyle choice for us. So that's eventually what really convinced me, right? That everyone is going to be better off lifestyle wise, even though our income was likely going to take a hit. I was under no illusions that I wasn't taking this step into self-employment as a bet to maximize my earnings or my lifetime earnings, even though it turned out to be okay. Although I will say later, only last year, like only 2025 was the first time that I exceeded my income that I was making at Amazon back in 2018. And I'm completely happy with that, right? And so, but I think if you were looking at the area under the curve, if I had stayed there, I would probably still have made more money. So certainly this wasn't a financial decision. It was a lifestyle choice. Again, I tried to keep the lifestyle, not just me, myself, but of the family, being able to sort of be more free and be able to spend more time and so on and so forth. And I think it paid off, right? So I think it did work. There was a bit of difficulty in the beginning, I think, again, in sort of dealing with the uncertainty, because I didn't really manage to start making any money until about 9 or 10 months in. And there was certainly a period of uncertainty. Happy to dig more into that period because that was interesting. But sort of hope that provides some clarity. Happy to dig more.
Yeah, actually, I want to touch on one thing.
Yes.
You mentioned a couple of times this stoic concept of negative visualization. For those that might not know what that is, can you like walk through your process of how you went about that and how it helped you?
Yes. Uh, you know, I think I had internalized this before I even learned about the Stoics. Sort of when I learned that sort of it resonated, I realized it was something that's already been discussed. So basically, I think it's just I think this is something a lot of people do again, like just thinking about like what's the worst thing that could happen if I were to make this decision, right? And I think it's very reassuring when you realize that the worst case scenario is not that consequential. This doesn't mean that it costs nothing. Thinking like, hey, if my house were to burn down, I have home insurance, right? So at least I won't go bankrupt or have a big financial hit. Sure, I don't want my house to burn down, but at least it won't be a huge deal, right? So thinking of things like these, and I know it's not very pleasant to think about the bad case scenarios, but actually is find that it gives me more confidence to know that whatever happens, happens. And even the worst case is tolerable and recoverable. So everything else is a bonus, right? If it's not the worst case, if it's something a little bit better, it doesn't need to be the best outcome. If it's something in between, it's already better. So I use it again, like even with personal things, even with regards to personal choices like moving houses or sending the kids to a different school or things like that. I think sort of that I try to think about. Sometimes things are hard to quantify, of course, that when they're like more emotional or other things. But it's still, I think, a very helpful framework, right, to sort of not end up in sort of analysis paralysis or just general fear of change. So yeah, it's
You know, I think that can be really helpful. One thing though, do you think you could take it too far? Like, do you think at some point that could become toxic? That kind of thinking?
I don't know actually. There's probably a balance where there's an interesting side note. Right? So when I moved to Seattle, a few of my work colleagues were what you would call had a bit of like prepper survivalist instincts. Actually, incidentally, here in the Seattle area, Pacific Northwest, we're very prone to natural disasters. We're surrounded by, 5 active volcanoes. We're on 2 major earthquake faults. We sort of have floods, heavy rains, landslides, wildfires every the summer. Like if you're the kind that you're paranoid about natural disasters, like it sort of makes you want to do something about it. And I had this this colleague in particular, right, who was very much into this stuff, right, thinking about, what if the Mount Rainier were to erupt? What if there were going to be a 9 magnitude earthquake tomorrow? What would we do? And initially, I thought it was ridiculous to think about all these, unlikely but very catastrophic situations. But I started to realize that the preparedness of it, right? I mean, is what actually gives you the confidence again to go about your life and say, whatever were to happen, if there were to be an earthquake tomorrow, I've already prepared. I have 6 months of supplies in my house. If we were to get disconnected from civilization and so on and so forth. And I think the threshold to answer your question comes. Of course, it's not a very quantitative threshold, but it's something that you feel reasonably prepared, right? And because this is something we used to discuss over lunch, right? I mean, sure, if you want to be really, really paranoid, that you would build an underground bunker that you can live into for 10 years and you have fully self-sufficient, it's unreasonable. Right? I mean, it would be too expensive because tens of millions of dollars and, it would have to be a lot of maintenance. So we don't do that. That we preppers, I consider myself one of them now because I got convinced that we just do reasonable preparation. We know that if I were to get a power outage for a week, it won't be the end of the world. For some of my neighbors, it is, right? And they panic. Oh my God, I have no power, no heating, whatever. We have a generator, we have extra fuel, we have water, we have food, and so on and so forth, right? So, and I think this, by the way, the threshold is like you feel reasonably prepared. This, I think, comes as well if you're buying insurance, right? I mean, you're buying life insurance, disability insurance, health insurance as well, especially when you're self-employed and you have have to deal with the free market. What is sufficient insurance? If I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, hopefully not, but I leave my family with having to fend on their own. I mean, how much money do they need to recover? And of course, you can think the more the better, but you have to draw a line. And it almost goes back again, right, to it's almost like it's all negative visualization all the way down, right? You keep thinking with this level, what would happen? Like with this level of preparedness, what's the worst case scenario? And once you start thinking it's actually recoverable, that tends to be enough, right? It doesn't need to be it's as if nothing happened, right? It's just at least you can emerge out of it. I think what you want to avoid is technically this is, I'm a big Nassim Taleb fan. I don't know if you guys read Taleb or read Taleb, but he introduced this concept of an absorbing barrier to me. I think it's a technical term they use in finance as almost like the point of no return. When like you're bankrupt and you can't recover, right? It's game over. You're dead, right? Or you're financially ruined. And of course, metaphorically, I think it can apply to lots of things, even career-wise. Like if you ruin your reputation, it could be an absorbing barrier. Right now, you can't recover. Nobody will want to work with you. There's all these things like that that I think is sort of this kind of preparedness that you want to avoid that absorbing barrier. Like the point where if you were to hit it, is going to be either impossible to re-emerge or significantly difficult. So that I think that sort of helps find that threshold of like not end up just, preparing forever, right? And just becoming paranoid and obsessed with the preparation, but actually find the point where this allows me to restart my life. Dentally, I mentioned that David Heinemeier Hansen, the creator of Ruby on Rails, who wrote that blog post, has a keynote talk. I think it was maybe 2016, 2017. He talks about his career as a prepper backpack. Right? This he thinks, business is so, which also was very inspiring to me. Like business is so unpredictable that he's not relying on whether what he's doing will continue to work indefinitely, but what he wants to know is that if he had to start over, can he start over? And he's sort of working on that preparation. Right? And I find that very, very inspiring, right, in terms of making decisions under uncertainty, risk taking, and so on and so forth.
If you did it once, you can do it again, right? Like that's the kind of idea behind it.
Yeah, and it builds a muscle, I think, that I like to think. There's another hobby of mine that I like to sort of think about our ancestors, not recent ancestors, hunter-gatherer ancestors, 10,000 years ago plus. Think about how, DNA-wise, we're probably very similar. I mean, there haven't been a lot of generations since our hunter-gatherer ancestors, so probably we haven't changed that much. But we live in a completely different environment. Consider that hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago and before, our ancestors used to wake up in the morning, walk into the forest, and they had to find food. They literally had to step into uncertainty. Should I walk straight? Should I walk left? Should I walk right? Every step is a decision under uncertainty, trying to find something to bring home to eat. If they didn't manage, it would be a very big deal, very problem, right? I mean, they wouldn't survive. But presumably they built enough mental muscle, right, to fend and to deal with that uncertainty, to tame that uncertainty, to make the very unpredictable of finding food in the forest more predictable. And I think this, in the modern world, if you think about it, leads us to a very predictable path. When you think about it, like we start school, you go to kindergarten, you go grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, everything is like leveling up. You take a job in the corporate world, you start as a junior. We call it the career ladder, which is an interesting metaphor because literally you're going one rung at a time. You go level 1, level 2, level 3, and so on and so forth. It's almost like a video game where as soon as you get so many points, you level up to the next level and so on and so forth. But I think there's a lot of, outside of that world of school, academia, corporate world, the business world in particular, the entrepreneurial world, is more similar to the hunter-gatherer in the forest. You have no idea where the loot is. You have to navigate, you have to explore, tinker, make sure that you don't end up with that absorbing barrier. You don't end up injured and you can't hunt anymore. You don't end up financially ruined and so on and so forth. So it's almost like there's more parallels with like finance and investing. Like we don't know what the stock market is going to do or the economy is going to do. And you have all these heuristics and patterns about diversification, building portfolios and so on and so forth. And I think um, that's um, that's another part of this that sort of I came to realize as soon as I jumped into self-employment. Maybe we can talk
Yeah,
about it more, but
absolutely.
yeah.
I think you said a lot of really great, interesting concepts. I think balancing the preparedness and balancing the amount of time we spend on thinking of what could go wrong with action and then saying, okay, I have enough. Now I need to go. Everybody has their own balance of which way they go. My question to you is, how did you find your right balance? And maybe even before that, what game did you want to play when you decided to start small bets, right? Because clearly you were in the corporate game
Yes,
and you left the corporate game to
yes.
find some other fulfilling way to spend your time. You knew you had a requirement for, financial stability to provide for your family to prevent the worst things from happening. But at the same time, you had your own fulfillment of driving meaning and happiness in your life. And so when you went to small bets, what were you trying to optimize for in your life?
Lifestyle, right? I mean, it was all about lifestyle, I would say, which I think I still believe it's the ultimate goal. And lifestyle, of course, is a vague term. Everyone interprets it differently, right? But I think here's what happened to me. To go back a step back when I was still at Amazon, right? I basically at one point I looked around me, right? I was 8 years in. I knew everyone in my org, right? I knew people, I knew their lives, I knew what they were doing. And I didn't envy anyone. Like envy, not in a bad way. Like I didn't want to be in
Yeah,
anyone's shoes. Not even the executives who were making millions of dollars with like a
sure.
huge house and whatever. Because again, I felt like these people are just always stressed out, always busy, pretty much Monday to Sunday. The work that they're willing wasn't particularly meaningful. Like lots of bureaucracy and a small accomplishment just takes years or months and so on and so forth. I think what made me leave that finally, like the right thing, was almost like an act of desperation, almost like I didn't want to become like them again, like not because there was anything wrong particular, but I didn't want my lifestyle to continue to be that, and I really felt the urge that I just can't let it happen. And timing wise, I think I was a bit helped at the time that I sort of had just finished the project I was working on, and I felt it was the perfect moment. As I was mentioning before, I was waiting for the right moment. I thought if I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave, because now I'm wrapping up something. I was about to start a new year. It was the end of 2018, and I quit without having anything planned. Right? So at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do. So between then and founding Small Bets, there was a couple of years because I quit Amazon January 2019. I started Small Bets in late 2021. Between then, there was a period where the naive period, I would say, the first 9 months of self-employment, where I treated it like a full-time job. I literally thought, here I took stock of my assets. I thought of, okay, what can I do? I had been working in software development for like 15 years total. I had specialized in a category, in a niche of technology and building databases, and I thought, what else should I do if not build a database software business? It seems like the obvious thing. Like that's what I specialized in. That was what I had most experience in. And I said, sure, like I did in the past when I had a job. If I focus, I work hard, and I work properly, and I'm smart about this, it should succeed. Because again, like in the predictable world of the corporate world, that worked for me. I worked hard, I pursued my goals, I tracked them, and I got where I wanted to go. And even though by many measures this project was working well, I was ticking the boxes, I was reaching the milestones that I set, and I was making progress. As a commercial idea, that for something to actually make me money that I could live off, it wasn't happening. Like, sort of long story short, right? So 9 months passed. I launched this project. I announce it to the world. I open it for customers, and I make $2,000 on the first day, which was okay. Right? I mean, it was nice. But a couple of days later, I started to realize that the amount of signups slowed down significantly after a couple of days. I started to realize, this is not going to be a significant amount of money, at least in the near term. And then I faced another fork in the road. Like, I had already invested 9 months in this project. By the way, I was living off my savings. I had some healthy savings, but I didn't have infinite savings. I had maybe 4 years that I could live off my savings, and I end up with zero. So I had already almost wiped out a quarter or one-fifth. So it wasn't at the end of the runway, but it was already a significant chunk. So after this 9-month period, I thought, okay, I have two options, maybe three options, but one I didn't really want, because I could go back to the corporate world, which in my head, that chapter was closed. I don't want to do it, so I didn't want to do that. The other one of the options was to double down on this project that I had started. I had invested 9 months into. And I was assembling a small team. I had someone helping me part-time. It was becoming a serious thing. But I applied the negative visualization concept again. And the outcome there, the negative outcome started to scare me because I could imagine another part where I spend another year on this project. I wipe another quarter of my savings and I'm still not making significant money. And then what? I do another third year. That I mean, it was scary to commit so hard to one thing where there wasn't any not even any guarantees, but not even any strong signal that this was going to be making enough money for me to be able to live off. And the consequence would have been that I wipe out all my savings, my family's savings, and maybe I would have to go back to the corporate world. Right? I mean, double sort of negative, right? I mean, end up back to square one and having to go back to the environment that I just left. So this gave me a bit of a helpful stressor, a bit of a small crisis of anxiety, but nothing radical. I wasn't like panicking or anything, but it was making me reevaluate, like, how do I actually tame this uncertainty? I really badly didn't want to go back to the corporate world. And I started to ask myself, okay, I want to start to exercise this muscle of making money on my own. Like, how can I make $1,000 by the end of next month or by the end of this month? I remember asking myself and sort of asking that question and working backwards from it ended up being very important for me to try to find opportunities where I could still maintain an independent lifestyle. That where I could still choose the hours I'm working, what I'm working on, who I'm working with, how much I'm charging, from where I'm working, and so on and so forth, and still make some money. In the beginning, these opportunities weren't anything very glamorous. I started taking some some odd freelancing gigs, one-off things. I had some connections, people I had worked with. I reached out to them and said, "Hey, can I take anything from your backlog? Like, can I help you with some things?" And some people were telling me, "Hey, yes, you can help us with some of these things." And I was doing small things, 10, 20 hours a month, not even a week. So not even part-time work, but invoicing, charging by the hour, freelance kind of work. Eventually, as I've started to do more of these, I started to become a bit more picky, right? And doing the ones that were even a bit more enjoyable, a bit more interesting. But at the beginning, I wasn't being picky at all. I was doing all sorts of things, still related to my expertise. I wasn't like driving Uber or whatever. I was still doing mostly programming work, but things like I was helping companies with interviews. I was writing technical documentation. This wasn't particularly exciting work. I wasn't waking up in the morning looking forward to do it, but was suddenly I was actually making some money, and that was felt very, very important. Now I could optimize the machine rather than just fight for or just deal with uncertainty what's going to happen. I could see some money coming in, and it was slowing down my burn rate as well, even though I wasn't necessarily making it exactly how much I was spending. Suddenly out of the shortfall was much smaller. Eventually I started to experiment with different products instead of just services. One of my first successful projects was I wrote a short ebook, self-published, about a programming topic, but related to my work at Amazon. It was called The Good Parts of AWS. This was a topic that to a lot of junior engineers, software engineers, they find very daunting. And I wrote a distilled version of like what is the 80-20 that they should learn about this topic. And it did very well. I mean, it made about overall over its lifetime, this project made about $100,000 in sales. I think within the first few weeks after I released it, was like $40,000 or $50,000, which basically what ended up happening was I was doing a lot of these small projects. This is what the idea of small bets became. That I was waking up in the morning and asking myself, how should I spend the 8 hours I have in front of me? And I wasn't being committed. I wasn't committed to anything. Basically, I could continue working on something I started the day before, but I could work on something new. Basically, whatever I was feeling any pull. Now my pull wasn't just, interesting things or just exciting things. I really wanted to make this lifestyle sustainable. And to make it sustainable, I need to make money. I need to be able to pay my bills, hopefully have some savings and so on and so forth. And so there was a big commercial aspect out of this. Basically, I was asking myself, and I remember at one point I set a goal after I started asking myself, like, how can I make $1,000 this month? And that started to become easy. I said, I want to make at least K. $100,000 within the next 12 months. And I started sort of, again, waking up in the morning, asking myself, what can I do today that is conducive to that goal? And in the beginning, this wasn't easy. Again, it wasn't easy to just snap my fingers and make 100K within the next 12 months with independent work. Again, my definition of independent here is like it allows me the flexibility to choose who I work on, from what I work on, how much I charge, and so on and so forth. I still call the shots and so on and so forth. Long story short, before even small bets started, I had done dozens of small projects. I remember when the pandemic started, April 2020, like full on, when everyone was locked down. I created a short course about social media. This was something completely not in my wheelhouse. Unlike the ebook about AWS that I wrote, that was something I had a lot of experience in. But at the time, I started a Twitter account. I was posting on Twitter. I was doing what's so-called building public, right? So documenting my journey. And I had built a bit smallish, modest audience, about 10,000 followers or so after the first year of doing so. When the pandemic started, I heard a lot of people, right, there was a lot of uncertainty, who wanted to do things online and do their own projects. And I created this short course in a weekend, literally. I mean, I thought about the idea on a Thursday, I think. On Friday, I created a short script. On Saturday, I recorded it. On Sunday, I prepared the marketing material, the landing page, and the price and whatever. And on Monday, I launched it. And this project, this course that I sold for like $35 ended up making over $300,000 in total sales, almost all profit. There was no cost. Completely unexpected. I mean, I literally would have never guessed, that this would be like such a low input thing, something that I literally spent maybe 15 hours creating, could end up having such a big upside. And this was a bit of a shock. A pleasant shock, of course. That it sort of showed me how sometimes is being at the right place at the right time is even more important than just, the effort that you put into. That's this doesn't mean that the effort is worth nothing. I mean, the product needs to be worth something, but I think what helped me at the time was just it was the perfect time. This kind of content wasn't, and nowadays there's lots about it. How to start a Twitter account and whatever. But at the time, especially to an audience that I had, most tech people, engineers, these are not people who think about these kinds of things. It was new, it was fresh, it was needed with price, and the pandemic, I didn't engineer it. The pandemic just happened to be the right timing. And that allowed me to start thinking that a bit of like the hunter-gatherer approach, right? I mean, you can't just say, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to catch a big, have a successful hunt today. It's not about that. It's about heuristics. Maybe thinking about where you had a good hunt the previous days, or maybe you think about the seasons, or what, or maybe you hedge your bets. You say, if I'm going to try to hunt for deer, but if I don't manage before sunset, I will go by the river and gather some berries. Of course, I'd rather catch a deer instead of picking berries, but at least we won't starve. And you start to do things like this in business, I think, that to start to tame the uncertainty and build that portfolio. Like, you don't know what's going to work. And this is something I started to realize, that I think even the big visionaries, we think of like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, actually, I got an interesting insight from when I worked at Amazon. Again, like, where Jeff Bezos is considered one of the most visionary leaders of all time. But Amazon was a big portfolio of small bets when you think about it. I mean, incidentally, the biggest moneymaker in Amazon, the thing that is pretty much holding the company alive, is Amazon Web Services, the arm I worked in, which is a pure accident. It wasn't even a Jeff Bezos idea. It was one of the employees who started it, which happens to be the CEO of Amazon right now. But it wasn't even something that Bezos even cared much about at all. It wasn't his thing. It wasn't his baby. And it turned out to be the money printing machine. But even within Amazon Web Services itself, it was interesting. When I joined, AWS was about 4 products. And when I left, it was about 200 products, right? As you can imagine, I'm not going to break my NDA or whatever, but there was a handful that were making a lot of money. There was a lot that were just breaking even. and many of them may be losing money, right? And there was on a team that was on the breaking even side, that were always trying to sort of making it, becoming one of the big ones. And it sort of makes you think, like, consider Amazon. It has all the advantages in the world, right? Amazing resources, excellent brand, all the free cash flow. Jeff Bezos at the top, right? Sort of reputation, connections with customers, data, the economy, and whatever. It has everything you could imagine, and still can't predict what will work and what won't, right? And this idea helped me a lot. I did to sort of eliminating the belief that I need to be some visionary genius. I just need to be in a lot of places, a lot of time. So I still want to be proud of my work. Don't get me wrong. It's not like cutting corners or whatever, but it's more of like a search and rescue exploration process rather than um, climbing the ladder, right? Or just walking to a predictable path, yeah? Because you don't know what's at the end of that straight line. You want to be exploring, you want to be tinkering, trying different things.
Yeah, I have
So
a
yeah,
question actually,
yeah,
Dave, sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
Yeah,
No,
just
no.
that concept of small bets.
Yes.
When you were going through that initially, did you have any doubts? Because, a lot of traditional business advice is just, be good at one thing and focus
Yep.
on it and just go hard on that one thing. But what you went through is, hey, let me try all these different things. Some will work, some won't work. Did you have any like self-doubt? At what point did you say, hey, this is actually working out? And like, where did that tipping point happen?
I think at some point, I don't remember exactly when this happened, but I sort of felt like I could fend for myself. Like, again, like negative visualization again. Even though everything that was working stopped working, it's always a doubt in my head. Like, what if something were to change tomorrow and nothing stops working? I felt like I could go back into the metaphorical forest and find something. I started to learn the idea of becoming a marketer first, looking at the opportunities, looking at the resources I have, thinking about making conjectures, because there's no recipe for success in business, right? This is not like mix all these ingredients, stir them, put them in the oven, and you get the cake, right? There isn't that. There's patterns. This is skill, right? There's patterns, heuristic. This is why I think the Steve Jobs of the worlds were good, right? Because they made good conjectures. Not everything worked. I was recently looking at the Wikipedia page about Apple. Apple has hundreds of products that failed commercially. They went nowhere. But again, doesn't mean that Steve Jobs or whoever who sort of was making blind bets. But you start to recognize these patterns. What is more likely to work? What is less likely to work? You also want to take prudent risks, right? Putting in all bags in one basket. This is something that I think I speak with a lot of sort of aspiring and new entrepreneurs today as part of my sort of work. And I think the biggest risk for most entrepreneurs is actually a psychological risk. Most people are prudent enough that they're not necessarily betting the farm and losing everything and becoming actually literally bankrupt, financially bankrupt. But I think the biggest risk is like doing something, committing so much time, energy, effort into it, it flops, it fails because it happens very often. And then they become discouraged and they never do it again, or they go back to a full-time job, or they go back to the thing that they escaped from. And I think that's something that I learned to appreciate a lot. Right? I mean, I want to feel that the failures don't sting, don't cost me too much. That again, I can recover from them. To answer that question, I think what started to happen, I was hitting my goals. Right? So I was setting those goals. I want to make $1,000 this month. Then I increased it to 5,000. Then I 10,000. Then I said I want to make 100K the first year, and I did that. And then the next year was even better. And I cycled to many things. Like I mentioned, the Twitter course, the AWS book. There was lots of things that didn't work, but there were some things that had some mediocre success in the beginning. It was a newsletter. I was doing so. At one point, I was even making handmade cutting boards just to show the crazy diversification that I experimented with. And still doing some software, but lots of different things. I just felt that feeling that's very hard to describe, that I felt like I could go on the market, figure out what I want, and do something. That it's not a tangible thing. Again, just like how I think our ancestors of 10,000 years ago, even though they had no guarantee that they were going to find something, they knew that one way or another they'll find something to eat, even though they had no idea where the food was in the forest. So this is, I think, the closest thing that most of us are familiar with is finance. We all have this idea that, hey, if you invest in the S&P 500, you take a broad index fund, you should expect an average of 10%, 11% year on year return on average. Now, almost all of us know that there are years where like the stock market drops 30%, or there could be a big crisis like in 2010 that takes like 10 years to recover where it was, and so on and so forth. But we know that in enough time, with enough diversification, you're exposed to enough upsides, your downside is minimal, it's unlikely that you lose everything, and it's very likely that it will grow, right? And it's interesting to think of like what basically the principles that being applied there in finance, like you diversify, you expose yourself to new things. That's what like an index fund gives you, right? And you're protected from the downside by hedging your bets, and so on and so forth. And I think when you think about it as a self-employed person, you're also an investor. You're investing your time instead of your capital. Like you have, say, 8 hours a day of time that comes every morning, every day, and you're deciding how do you invest it, right? Investing it all, picking one thing and investing it all in that one thing, and you blindly say, "This is it. I'm going to ignore everything else." It's like you're treating investing where you pick your favorite stock. You say, hey, I love Elon Musk and Tesla. I'm going to put all my life savings into that stock and I'm just going to ride with it. Sure, it can work, and it works sometimes. And you could argue that that's the best way to maximize wealth, right? Because if it works really well. But if you lose, it's really bad, right? I mean, you can lose a lot, right? And that's the downside. So this is not a strategy for maximizing earnings or becoming the next Elon Musk or making $1 billion or whatever. This is more of a strategy of survival first, right?
Yeah.
I mean, making sure you stay in the game, and then you build the skill, you build the mental muscle to just make enough to live your life. Maybe we have time to talk about the small bets acquisition. That was something that was completely not on my radar at all. Right? I mean, I was even think that what business was even sellable. But when you're there, like when you're in the arena, when you have something, the future can only bring you positive surprises. Right? I mean, nobody could. I mean, one day I got a DM on Twitter and say, hey, would you be interested in us buying small bets? And say, okay, let's talk about it. And that happened. Of course, it could have not happened, but it's like when your downside is protected, tomorrow can only bring good news. And that's, I think, a very nice place to be and something I try to aspire to construct. Yeah.
I want to go back to the lifestyle comment that you made as to the primary reason that what you were trying to optimize for after you made the decision to leave Amazon. And, you gave us great insights into your financial goals and how you structured your day. And you kept mentioning 8 hours a couple of times. And so I want to understand, what was your thesis of the lifestyle you were seeking to achieve when you first left, and how your vision of what your lifestyle
Yes.
you were trying to drive towards evolved during your journey.
Yeah. A couple of points I would say. Sort of this is something I learned over, as I grew up and matured. At the time, I don't flourish under structure. And this is not a good or bad thing. I think we're all very different. My wife, for example, is very different. I mean, she likes structure. She likes, having a clear to do, what to do. This is the time for work, the time for family, and so on and so forth. I'm very different. I dislike having work start always from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday to Friday, 5 days a week, and so on and so forth. I like to work when I'm inspired, take a break when I'm not, go for a walk, think, and so on and so forth. And I realized that in the corporate world, it's very, very hard. I'm sure there's some opportunities, but it's very hard to find an arrangement that is compatible with the lack of structure. And understandable. That it's very hard to go to your manager and say, hey, I'm not working for this week because I don't feel inspired. That it just wouldn't make sense. Right? I mean, and that was something that within my new lifestyle I could arrange. Now, ironically, I was mentioning 8 hours more, again, like metaphorically, because I don't even have the 8 hours. Again, I work whenever I feel inspired, whether it's in the morning, afternoon, at night, or whether mostly my work tends to happen in bursts of intensities nowadays, which is, I think, is my best mode of working. I go into a week or a couple of days or sometimes a bit longer of high intensity work. And then I wander about. Again, very much hunter-gatherer style, watching, waiting, thinking, and then I strike when I feel inspired. And that's important for me. I really feel like I get motivated like this. I'm more productive like this. I work with the seasons as well. Again, maybe I'm stretching the analogy too much to the hunter-gatherers, but I feel the same way. I'm more motivated in fall, for example. My kids start school. I have more free time. The weather is not great where I live, and I just feel like this is the more time to lock in, as the kids say nowadays. And I think I do most of my best work, September to March, more or less. And then summer, take it easier. We tend to visit family in summer, and so on and so forth. So this is an important part of my lifestyle, working with the seasons, working with my own sort of unstructured way, calling my own shots, and so on and so forth. But the other major part of this is the family thing, right? So I just really enjoy like the freedom of being able to say, shall we take, the kids just had spring break last week, right? So it's a nice day outside. Let's go somewhere, right? And you don't have to ask anyone, or it doesn't mean I have no commitment. Sometimes I have things on my calendar. I talk to people and so on and so forth. But these are things that I control. I can decide how much to take on, how little to take on, and so on and so forth. And for me, the way I'm built, I benefit a lot about it. Again, I'm not making a general statement for everyone. Actually, I know people closely who would break down if they didn't have some form of structure, right, that would allow them. I know people who are self-employed, who, even though they have the flexibility of designing their own unstructured life, they still go to their office at 9 a.m. in the morning, they log themselves in, and they come out at 5 p.m. because they want that mode of, I'm in work mode, I'm in family mode, I'm in some other mode. I'm not like that. Right? I'm sort of more chaotic, but it's organized in my way. Right? So this is what I'm meaning by lifestyle. Like, it's basically being able to choose my life arrangement. Maybe it's an even more precise term, right? How I spend my time, how much flexibility I have to in sort of choosing what to do and not what to do, and so on and so forth. So it's part professional and work related, part family, being able to spend more time with my family and having that flexibility being there, and so on and so forth, which is an important balance for me. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way I can describe it in my words.
I want to talk a little bit about the sale to Gumroad. So we kind of touched on it a little bit. But it seemed like from our research, it seems like you were just hitting your stride with small bets when the acquisition offer came through. What made you feel like that was the right time to sell, or did you feel like you could take it further
Yes.
before seeking an acquisition?
Yeah. So, like I said before, like I felt like this was the kind of business that wasn't even sellable at the time. So I was certainly operating with the assumption that I'm going to keep running this and I'm going to continue to experiment. But I wasn't even necessarily thinking that this was necessarily something I was going to do indefinitely. In fact, at the time, I started self-employment 2019, and sort of this small business acquisition happened last year, 2025. I think every single year, 2019, 2020, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, there was always some major thing that was the main sort of business income thing, right? And sort of probably 2024 was small bets being the main thing that was doing well, and so on and so forth. But I had been through enough years that I knew that every year was different. Until then, I was under no illusion that small bets was going to be an indefinite thing for me. So I was still, again, trying my best to make it work and grow and so on and so forth. But in the back of my mind, I was also thinking and exploring, like, what else, thinking about other opportunities and so on and so forth. So the opportunity came, I think, again, like a bit of like being in the right place, right time. I already had a good relationship with Gumroad. I was actually back in 2020. I was freelancing for them for quite a while, for about a couple of years. Freelance work. I was very much involved with them. Like, I knew the team a lot. So I think at the time, they were considering sort of investing more into communities, and I happened to be the one on their radar that they knew best. So when they think about communities, I was running one that I was using their platform. Incidentally, again, they knew about me. And yeah, I think it was, again, one of those right things, right moments, right place, right time. And probably couldn't have happened with any other company. I don't think any other company would have found small bets an interesting asset, or at least be able to pay me enough to let me go of it. I think Gumroad saw it as, again, like as a synergy, as they tend to call it in these kinds of acquisitions. Right? So it was able to pay me enough to give up the income stream that I was having. So the way I reasoned about it, again, I thought of small bets as a product. Right? So Gumroad made me an offer that the product felt to me like the price that they were paying was worth the asset that I had. Right? So the offer was 1.8 million cash and 1.8 million in stock options. Eventually, we renegotiated the options, and I didn't get that part of the deal. There was a commitment to it. So sort of we were working together. It ended up being just 1.8 million cash, which I got paid in full, and I'm very happy with it. And I think, again, like seeing it as a business is what it was doing. Sorry, seeing it as almost like as a product. I think I got a good price for it. Right? So that's how I see it. And part of this sounds confusing sometimes to people, right? But I like to tell people you can't get too attached to your businesses. Right? You almost like have to treat them like cattle, not like pets. I mean, you can't fall too much in love with them because they're not in your control. Right? I mean, the market controls them. Competitors come. What was working one day stops working tomorrow, and so on and so forth. Not You could be doing the best and dedicating all your time and attention. It just doesn't matter if you're doing something for commercial purposes. You're at the whims of the market and of things, of this big black box. Yeah, no. Again, I still feel proud of the work, and I'm still running small bets. It was part of what I mean. I keep running it and managing for a few years, so I'm still involved into it. But there wasn't some feeling like some people say that I feel like some part of my identity got taken away or whatever. And I think it's a bit intentional as well. I was always careful, as I was saying, that I mean, even in small things like how I describe myself. Right? I like to describe myself. I'm self-employed. I do random things. I tinker, experiment. I don't know. I did lots of things in the last 7 years. Hopefully, I'm going to be doing lots of things in the next 7 years. And so I don't want to be just the founder of small bets and just be seen like that. And then if it's not part of me anymore, now I lost part of my identity. So even if I'm like writing my bio on Twitter, on LinkedIn or whatever, I'm sometimes careful not to attach labels that are not necessarily within my control. So it was also a bit of psychological preparedness. Not necessarily because I thought it was going to be acquired, but because I thought like this might not be a thing anymore. And I don't want to even feel that sting. Just like what happened with lots of other things, even that, like the Twitter course that I mentioned, made a lot of money in 2020, but it's not making, right? It's still making a few $100s a month still, but nothing significant. No, like if I were to go all into that part, as I'm now some social media guru and this is my course and whatever, it would be certainly not the part that would have been durable or in the long term. So yeah, I don't know if that
Yeah,
explains.
no, that's great. Yeah, I mean, 1.8 million, that's a pretty good payout for a small community. I'm guessing comfortable now, right? Although,
Comfortable, yeah. Still wouldn't say I'm like financially independent or financially retired. So again, like I'm
yeah, a couple million
comfortable.
doesn't go as far as it used to, right?
It doesn't go as far as it used to again, and we live comfortably. I have 3 kids now, so family grew even more. The fact that all of our relatives are back in Malta, we're not living very expensively, but we travel twice a year to visit family or whatever. So I'm thinking now I'm back into the mode of thinking, what next? And
Yeah.
I'm
So
very inspired. Yeah, I'll let you
that's what I
ask.
was gonna kind of get at. So, you've had this exit. Yet, even in the pre-interview questionnaire, you said, you're searching for what's next. So what's kind of
Yeah.
driving how you write your next chapter? Like, what are you looking for, and what kind of you built a community, you sold it. What's the next chapter look like for you?
I'm sort of back to I'm walking in the forest again. That's how I feel right now. Right? So I have nothing concrete yet. I'd like to do something together with Gumroad. I still have a very good relationship with them, and this was something I was actually just at their office in New York a couple of weeks ago. Excuse me, and we were just talking about brainstorming about some things we could do. Like I learned basically I learned a lot from learning the small best community about what people, my audience in small best the niche has been new and aspiring entrepreneurs. Right? So that was the category of people I was helping. People who are just thinking of getting into self-employment, and then eventually the people who are just started and they're struggling, like how to navigate a lot of the topics we talked about today: navigate uncertainty, find opportunities, take prudent risks, and so on and so forth. And there's lots of little things scratching my own itch, probably I could say. For example, I do a lot of consulting calls. Like I do a lot of one-on-one calls with small bets members every week. Like I think last year I averaged about 10 calls per week. Like, so I talk a lot with people, and I'm missing, for example, a piece of software that helps me organize all the notes with every person who I talk to. I use AI, of course, to summarize conversations and get chat transcripts and whatever. But it's all very disorganized. The transcripts go into my inbox, and sometimes, there's like 3 Davids that I talk to, and sometimes I think I'm going to talk with one David, and then I show up and it's another David, and I'm confused, right? And things like that. So it's like a vague idea that I have that I think I can build a piece of software that could be useful for people who are doing high volume consultancy remotely online, right? So there's one-on-one sessions to just organize their notes, their schedule, their calendars, and so on and so forth. I'm not sure if there's like a thing that I'll actually do, but I'm thinking of ideas like this. I have like 3, 4 ideas, right, of that kind, where I will almost certainly put on the market this year, right? And again, see what works. Take away lots of things, take what works, throw away the rest, kind of thing. But I don't know. It's very hard to tell. I am in this exploration phase right now. Right, so spending some time to think and explore. I'm very inspired by the AI tools nowadays. I feel like 10x more productive, especially with the latest and greatest models. The most recent thing I was been doing, completely unrelated to work, but with my 2 oldest kids, an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, there's this game development competition that's happening this month, and we were like creating a small video game together with my kids, and it was it's interesting because my interest in computers back when I was like 10 years old started because of an interest in making my own video games. And I can start to appreciate how it used to take me like a whole summer to get some game character to move on the screen, and
Right.
now with
Now you do
AI
the prompt.
we're just, we're so productive. I mean, X is probably not even exaggerating. And
Yeah.
I think the precise answer is I don't know exactly. I can't tell you this is the exact idea, but almost certainly I'm going to be putting things on the market this year. Probably, almost certainly not 1, 2, 3, 4 things as I've done before, and I'll evaluate. I'll go. I'll play it by ear, steer, collect course, like I've done before. I feel even more confident than before, even though I don't have anything tangible to give me that reassurance. I think again, like, that tacit muscle that you build. Yeah, I can go to the market and find something that can be useful to the world with, and I have the willingness to try different things, not attach myself to things, and experiment, and so on and so forth. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
that's
sounds great.
exciting.
All right. Well, Daniel Vassallo, thank you for joining us. It sounds like you're
So,
living your best life. So,
yeah,
best of luck in your new chapter. We always
thank
like
you.
to close with a quote. And
Yeah,
I think given your um, kind of nature of, doing a lot of different things, I think this is very apropos. So it's the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. And that's by Albert Einstein. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
yeah,
you so much for joining us. Thanks for the great
absolutely.
conversation.
This was great. Thanks, you guys. Cheers.
Thanks,
Okay.
Daniel. Appreciate
Cheers.
it. Cheers.